Traveling Log, Documentation 1-1. I'm the person adventurers have taken to calling the Scribe, a title I gained as I travel the lands, collecting as much knowledge and wisdom as I can before reintroducing it to modern societies through controlled lectures at various locations across the star. However, raw historical data and scientific fact are not all that I've amassed. I must confess, I have a curiosity for collecting stories, and while not all tales I've gained are worthy of lecture, I shall document some of them here all the same. My first retelling shall begin with an adventurer I met during my travels. He was a Hrothgar of the Lost variant, born in Ilsabard, and his name was Grorin Zoras, if I am remembering correctly. Turns out, at a very young age during his childhood, he was separated from his kin and was presumed dead. But instead of dying out in the wilderness, he was located by the 14th Legion, led by Gaius von Belsar, in which case he must have already been found somewhere near the border of Aldenard, as the 14th Legion had already begun their Eorzean campaign by then, though I doubt he remembers exactly where he was found at such a young age. All he could tell me was that he was conscripted and brought under Gaius's banner. Frankly, this isn't unheard of. Despite his many crimes, the Black Wolf was known to have a soft spot for those displaced by conflict, even if he was the source of conflict. I empathized with Zoras. Being raised in a militaristic lifestyle couldn't have been easy, given the Garlean's penchant for discrimination. Oh yes, it's true that the Empire always talked about taking in everyone fairly under their banner. That is, until you realize that pure-blooded Garleans were always considered one's superior. I asked the Hrothgar what changed his mind on the Empire, and ultimately he explained what he heard regarding the tragedy of Bodzia. Apparently he was rather disillusioned at that point, even if he did feel like he owed the 14th Legion much. But defection isn't easy. Zoras waited until he was part of a convoy to deliver supplies and reinforcements to the battles at Cartano. But, as everyone knows, that's where Bahamut revealed himself and began his rampage. The convoy he was a part of was obliterated, leaving him stranded and shell-shocked near the edge of the Black Shroud. Apparently, seeing the sky ablaze also triggered the awakening of the Echo, which likely knocked him out because of the already growing mental stress. The next thing he remembered was being resuscitated by a Duskwhite Elizin. After a series of understandably tense events, he turned himself over to Gridanian leadership for interrogation. The Seedseers could sense no lies coming from him, as he confessed everything he knew about the Empire and the 14th Legion. But thankfully, this story ended on a happier note, as Zoras began working for Gridania. He ultimately found kinship with their people and eventually signed on as a member of the city-state's Adventurers Guild. Since then, he had performed all sorts of odd jobs and traveled the land, upon which he eventually met me and told me his story. I've not seen him in a long time, and I hope he's doing well. If nothing else, the Garleans likely taught him how to survive, so I assume he'll be just fine. I must confess that not all the stories I hear are about one person. In fact, it was recently brought to my attention that there was a group of Lalafels said to have traveled to another world. Of course, this piqued my interest, as I assumed they had tapped into some ancient form of arcane magic to move between the source and its shards. However, the truth was much more entertaining than my fiction. I was expecting some kind of cabal of Lalafell and Archmages, but what I discovered was a group of intoxicated bootleggers. This place was something called the Huckleberry Saloon, and honestly, I wasn't even disappointed. In fact, I pushed to learn just a bit more. I've yet to speak with its proprietors, but from what I was able to gather, this was a bar unlike others I'm familiar with. Oh sure, they did in fact claim that they had been to another world, but the stories I heard were so abstract and strange, I'm convinced they're the ramblings of someone who had been sampling their own product a bit too often. Because half of what I heard was legitimately impossible, in both theory and in practice. However, out of those ramblings apparently came quite a few unique and popular beverages. So, who am I to question how one finds their inspiration? This entire discovery just goes to show how important and rewarding thorough research can be. You go looking for crazed Lullafellan wizards, only to find them all drinking, shouting, and firing what looked like a stolen gun from the Machinist Guild into the ceiling. What happens next is up to them. I just hope they don't give the Wood Whalers too much trouble, because they are technically operating within Gridanian borders. Sometimes what I come upon isn't even a person or a group, but pages and documentation pointing me in the direction of things either good or ill. In this case, I can't say what I've read bodes particularly well. What recently came across my table were research notes, something belonging to one Dr. Obsid. Obsidier? Obsidere. Yes, that feels better. Obsidere it is. I can only assume this was their research, as their name repeated more than once upon the documents. But I found the content of these pages to be infinitely more interesting than the person. These documents went over one thing over and over again: vampirism. Strange as it is, this isn't the first time something like this has been brought to my attention. In fact, there are multiple monsters in the world of Hydaelyn that are well documented for the ability to drain the blood and/or ether of other living things. Voidsent, of course, being the biggest culprit. As such, it came as little surprise how the notes from Dr. Obsidere referred to some of his subjects as void-touched, and then a later stage of his project called Desmodons. Some of the data from these pages were heavily redacted or too damaged to read, but from what I could gather, this process involved altering the physiology of a species through the introduction of a particular unnatural bacteria. Ultimately, the end result would be an improved yet heavily changed variety of their core species. Faster, stronger, heightened senses, elongated teeth, etc. However, some drawbacks include sustaining themselves purely on the blood of spoken species, which would naturally lend themselves to a more predatory lifestyle. The goal of this research seemed to be in creating something that was capable of benefiting from the draining effects of a voidsent without actually being bound to the void like those of Lilith's Nightkin. A strange field of study, one in which I would have to ask this doctor what provoked such an obsession in the first place, seeing as there are easier ways to gain power than drastically augmenting a creature's genome. But maybe that's the point. I recall similar experiments were done during the time of the Allegan Empire. People and creatures altered so heavily through aetherochemistry that they looked nothing like they originally were. Perhaps this is similar. If so, and if this research was indeed as successful as the documents suggest, there will likely be subjects who have been driven mad by this change, much like the experiments of the Third Era. These notes repeatedly mention experimentation being held at the Azim Steppe. I might have to do my own research there, make sure this isn't an actual problem. Alchemical vampires. I'll have to remember that name. The echo will help to reveal the rest. But it looks like I'll be arriving at my destination soon. I think I've got time for one more story. My last recording shall be of a Rogadan woman named Abzug Boneforge. This one I actually met in person, and from whom I got a first-hand account. Apparently, she remembers almost nothing of her younger days. Her earliest memories were of being taken in by one of Aldenard's churches, and it was from the sisters of this establishment that she gained her current name and early life. While she was grateful for everything that the church had done for her, Abzug had the same gnawing feeling that many with incomplete memories have: a thirst for answers. Eventually, this led to her taking up service with the Adventurers Guild in Ul'dah, likely to help make a living and find answers for herself at the same time. But there was one thing about her tale that stood out to me. Not once did a dead end or failure at finding answers dim her spirits. She adventured with a smile on her face and a drink in her hand, eager to see what else might be discovered around the next bend. I can appreciate that mentality, and I suppose that blind optimism is ultimately what informed the next stage of her life. As fewer and fewer memories were revealed to her, the less she cared about her origins, content to embrace and enjoy the friends and found family that she had gained along the way. It was at this point she enlisted with Uldah's Immortal Flames, as she has a high success rate when it comes to her missions. However, she's always passed over for promotion because of how difficult she can be. Ignoring direct orders, drinking before a job, and a general lack of discipline have kept her within the rank of Flame Private. Yet they keep her around all the same because of her results. I complimented her on having the spirit to forge her own path instead of being shackled by mundane things. She offered me to drink with her. I politely refused. She called me a wuss. I called her conceited. And we both laughed for a solid minute afterwards. I hope she's doing well, wherever she is. But it would appear I've arrived at my destination. I'll need to end this recitation here. However, this was pleasant. Who knows, maybe recording the tales of others could be a new pastime between lectures. But here are the ruins, and it's time for me to get to work. Announce my arrival to any monsters that would cause me trouble, and teach them a lesson. Hello my friends, thank you very much for listening, and thank you for participating in my first ever, reaction to the content given to me for people's backgrounds, stories, and overall roleplay experiences within Final Fantasy XIV. But instead of simply reading off what was given to me, some people have asked that I give my interpretation or analysis of some of the work given from the point of view of a experienced lore fan. So if you like this analytical end to these kinds of videos, be sure to let me know in the comments, and I'll make sure to include them at the end of future videos like this in the future. So we'll begin with submission 1 for today, from Grorin Zoras. Honestly, it was fun to read a story in which someone escaped the militaristic lifestyle of the Garlean Empire. Because stories like that aren't as far-fetched as some people might think. There are many NPCs within Final Fantasy XIV that are on, I guess you would say, the side of the good guys, who are in fact Garlean deserters. Cid, of course, being the most popular one, but there are multiple other examples. However, I will say this. In the information that was presented to me, I recall some of the characters and side characters mentioned in the story were big name NPCs in the MSQ. I would advise against that for anyone else curious, simply on the standing of, if you're going to try to write yourself into the life of a big name NPC, you have to imagine how many other people are also doing that same thing. It doesn't make sense for someone to say, like, let's say they're besties with Thancred, but like 24 people also say they're besties with Thancred. So how does Thancred suddenly have this surplus of friends that are never brought up? Do you know what I mean? So be careful when you try to attach yourself to big name NPCs. Other than that, this story was absolutely delightful. Thank you so much, Grorin, for your submission. Which brings us to submission number 2, the Huckleberry Saloon. Honestly, the entire reason I included this one was because after reading it, I thought it was too delightful to not include. Plus, this wasn't one person, this was a roleplay venue that, well, I wanted to show that I'm not afraid to give the lore of venues if you are so interested. I found the idea of a bunch of funny Lalafels running a bar somewhere in the Lavender Beds to be quite hilarious, so that's why I included it here. However, Huckleberry Saloon, you do get one demerit from me, and if you're a fan of the channel, you likely know what I'm about to say. I recall reading somewhere in your submission that you said the entire reason you got drink ideas was from traveling to Europe at some point before returning to the Final Fantasy XIV universe, which I feel like I don't have to say that is 100% not lore friendly, not lore accurate at all. That gets the big red X from me, my friends. Anything that tries to connect the Final Fantasy XIV universe to other types of worlds or media, or even isekai content, is likely not going to be lore friendly at all, so I would strongly advise against it if that's what you care about. But if you don't care about those kinds of things, that's entirely fine. As you can see, even despite that inclusion of European beverages in this submission, I still had a delightful time reading it. Thank you, Huckleberry Saloon, for your submission. The third submission was from one called Des M. Astor. And the entire reason I included this one is because you would be shocked how many people have pulled me to a side and have asked me how logical it would be to include vampires in Final Fantasy XIV. I get that question more than you would think. I personally don't know where this fascination with trying to get vampires in this game came from. I'm more of a werewolf fan myself, but that's beside the point. So, something to remember, my friends, for any of you that are interested in the whole idea of vampires in the Final Fantasy XIV universe, we technically already have them. The entire point of the Nightkin in the Red Mage job quest was to essentially give us a type of mortal vampire, which was very interesting because, of course, it made use of ether, blood, dark pacts with void scent, stuff like that. So if you're ever interested in learning more about the idea of vampires in Final Fantasy XIV, I really recommend playing through the Red Mage job quest. But not only that, there are many monsters and creatures within this game that have what you would consider to be vampiric abilities. Of course, Void Scent being the biggest offenders, as they have been known to sip on the blood of some of their victims because blood is, of course, very ether-rich. So again, if you're interested in vampire-adjacent storytelling, Void Scent are not a bad option. But I will give this submission credit. I must give credit where it's due. They went for a more organic approach. And I appreciate that because it demonstrates an understanding that there is more to these kinds of things than just magic sometimes. The researchers during the time of the Algan Empire, for instance, they were well known for creating all sorts of monsters and abominations just for the lulz. So the idea of someone doing the same in this era and altering other people's physiology for their own research does not strike me as strange or against the lore in any way, shape, or form. In fact, it works with the lore very well. So this was a very fun submission to read through. Thank you, Des M. Astor, for your submission. And of course, the last submission for this video was of Abzug Boneforge. And this one, for lack of a better term, is just fine. I mean, it follows the lore and is just ambiguous enough that the creator is able to play with the material and expand upon it at their own leisure. It does not connect itself to major people or events unnecessarily, and it's more or less confined to what they themselves are doing and discovering on their own. And the fact that they create a character with no memory of their past or parents and didn't create an emo edgelord gets a thumbs up in my book. Very, very well done. Thank you, Abzug, for your submission. My friends, if you enjoyed this video and want to see more like it in the future, please let me know in the comments below and share my channel with your friends in roleplay groups. Let me know if you enjoyed the structure of this video, as I tried to please as many people as I could with it. But to prevent this video from getting too long, I will cut it off here. If you have your own submission that you would like to present to me, make sure to put it within my roleplay Dropbox on my Discord channel. Links will be in the description below. So, thank you all again for listening, and as always, stay safe, my friends.